The deafening roar of chainsaws filled the morning air as my world came crashing down, literally. I watched in horror as 3 of my prized oak trees toppled to the ground, their mighty trunks splintering under the assault of the HOA's hired contractors. 20 years of corporate slavery, my life savings, and a dream of independence were being sliced apart right before my eyes. But Patricia Anderson, the HOA president smirking from behind her designer sunglasses, had no idea who she was messing with. This wasn't just about trees anymore. This was war. 6 months earlier, life had been different. The sweet scent of pine shavings drifted through my 10-acre sanctuary as I guided my planer across a piece of cherry wood. Sawdust danced in the early morning sunlight streaming through the workshop windows, and the gentle whirring of machinery created a symphony I'd grown to love. After 2 decades of suffocating in a corporate cubicle, I'd finally found my slice of heaven at Silver Creek Lumber and Mill. "Hey, James!" Mike Peterson's booming voice carried over the noise as he strolled into the workshop, wiping sweat from his brow. My best friend since high school, Mike had been helping me run the place since I opened it 3 years ago. "That custom dining table for the Hendersons is looking sweet." I killed the planer and ran my hand over the smooth surface. "Should be ready for finishing by tomorrow. How's the morning delivery looking?" "Got 6 cords of firewood heading to that fancy development up north." These city folks sure love their aesthetic winter vibes. Mike chuckled, reaching for his work gloves. "Speaking of which, did you see the new signs they're putting up at Oak Ridge Heights?" I hadn't, but I'd heard rumors about the luxury housing development creeping closer to my property line. The kind of place where every blade of grass had to be regulation height and garden gnomes required committee approval. "They're installing one of those automated gates," Mike continued, "complete with a guard booth. Guess they're really going for that exclusive vibe." I shrugged, turning back to my work. As long as they stay on their side of the property line, they can build whatever they want. If only I'd known how naive those words would sound just a few weeks later. The first warning sign came on a crisp autumn morning. I was loading timber onto my flatbed when a glossy black Mercedes purred up my gravel driveway. The woman who stepped out looked like she'd gotten lost on her way to a country club luncheon. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, pearls that probably cost more than my truck, and heels completely unsuited for a lumber yard. "Mr. Sullivan?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Patricia Anderson, president of the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your establishment." I set down the lumber I was carrying. "Ma'am, I checked before buying this property. I'm well outside your HOA boundaries." "Oh, I'm aware." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through what looked like photos. "But your operation is having a significant impact on our community's property values. Those unsightly wood piles are visible from our walking trail, and the noise—" She wrinkled her nose. "Well, it's simply not compatible with the prestigious environment we're creating. With all due respect, Mrs. Anderson, this is a working lumber yard. It's been here longer than your development." Her smile tightened. "Things change, Mr. Sullivan. Progress is inevitable. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement." The way she said arrangement made my skin crawl. I'd spent enough years in corporate America to recognize a threat when I heard one. "My property, my business," I said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have orders to fill." As she clicked back to her car, I caught her muttering into her phone. "Plan B it is, then." I watched her drive away, an uneasy feeling settling in my gut. Mike appeared at my shoulder, wiping his hands on a rag. "Why do I get the feeling we just met our very own Cruella de Vil?" he asked. I shook my head, staring at the dust trail left by her Mercedes. "Because something tells me this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Looking back, I should have taken her threat more seriously. But I had no idea that this was just the beginning. That within months, my peaceful life would turn into a battlefield, and that simple lumber yard would become ground zero in a war I never asked for but couldn't afford to lose. Patricia Anderson's Plan B revealed itself on a frosty morning 3 weeks later. I arrived at the yard to find my front gate plastered with violation notices, each one more absurd than the last. Unauthorized industrial equipment, excessive noise pollution, environmental hazards. The letterhead proudly displayed the Oak Ridge Heights HOA logo, as if that gave them any actual authority over my property. I was still ripping down the notices when Mike pulled up in his truck. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, examining one of the crumpled papers. "Apparently, we're in violation of their aesthetic harmony guidelines. Didn't know lumber had to be aesthetically harmonious." "It gets better," I said, handing him another notice. "According to this one, our chainsaw usage violates their noise ordinance between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. You know, standard business hours." Mike snorted. "These people do realize we're running a legitimate business, right? Not hosting a quilting circle." Before I could respond, a familiar black Mercedes crawled past my property, moving slowly enough for Patricia to make eye contact through her tinted windows. She raised her coffee cup in a mock toast before speeding away. "Real subtle," Mike muttered. "What's her endgame here?" I had a pretty good idea, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. We had 3 custom orders to complete and a mountain of firewood to process before the weekend. Whatever game Patricia was playing would have to wait, but she wasn't interested in waiting. Over the next 2 weeks, the harassment escalated. First came the anonymous complaints to the county about unauthorized construction. Then the Environmental Protection Agency showed up for a surprise inspection, which we passed with flying colors, much to Patricia's visible disappointment when she happened to drive by during the inspection. The situation took a darker turn when our customers started receiving letters. Official-looking HOA documents warning them about supporting illegal industrial operations and threatening fines if they continued doing business with us. Some of our regulars laughed it off, but others, particularly those living in Oak Ridge Heights, canceled their orders. "She's trying to strangle us financially," I realized, watching another customer drive away without making a purchase. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Mike leaned against my office doorframe, his usual cheerful expression replaced with concern. "Maybe we should get a lawyer involved." "Not yet," I said, pulling up my security camera app. "First, we need proof." I spent that weekend installing additional cameras around the property, making sure every angle was covered. Mike thought I was being paranoid until the following Tuesday night, when the cameras caught 2 figures sneaking onto my property after hours. The footage was crystal clear. Patricia Anderson herself, accompanied by a nervous-looking man I recognized as her HOA secretary, Robert Walsh. They moved through my yard with purpose, stopping at my newest stack of premium hardwood. The next morning, I discovered every log had been spray-painted with bright orange X's, rendering thousands of dollars worth of timber essentially worthless for fine woodworking. "Got you?" I whispered, reviewing the footage for the 10th time. But my satisfaction was short-lived. That afternoon, 3 black SUVs pulled up to my gate. Patricia stepped out of the first one, followed by 2 men in expensive suits. "Mr. Sullivan," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I believe you know why we're here." I crossed my arms, staying behind my gate. "Enlighten me." "These gentlemen represent Oak Ridge Heights Development Company. Your establishment is becoming a significant liability. However, they're prepared to make you a very generous offer for your property." The taller suit stepped forward, holding out a business card. "We understand this is your livelihood, Mr. Sullivan. Our offer reflects that." I didn't take the card. "Not interested." Patricia's smile wavered. "Don't be hasty. This situation could become very uncomfortable for you. More uncomfortable than trespassing and vandalism." I pulled out my phone, showing them the previous night's security footage. The color drained from Patricia's face, but she recovered quickly. "Careful, Mr. Sullivan. You're playing a dangerous game." "No, Patricia," I said, my voice hard. "You're the one who's playing games. And trust me, you don't want to see how I play when pushed." As they drove away, Mike appeared at my side, So much for waiting on that lawyer, huh? I nodded, already pulling up my contacts. Call Sarah Martinez. Tell her it's time to go to war. The battle lines were drawn. Patricia thought she could bully me into submission, but she was about to learn a hard lesson about messing with a man's livelihood. This wasn't just about my business anymore. It was about standing up to the entitled few who thought their money gave them the right to destroy other people's dreams. Sarah Martinez's office smelled of leather and determination. The property rights attorney sat behind her mahogany desk, watching the security footage for the third time, her expression growing darker with each viewing. When she finally looked up, there was a predatory gleam in her eyes. "This is better than anything I could have hoped for," she said, pausing on a crystal-clear frame of Patricia's face. Most HOA bullies are smart enough not to do their dirty work personally. Mrs. Anderson just handed us a golden ticket. I shifted in my chair. "So we have a case?" "We have more than a case," Sarah replied, pulling out a legal pad. "But I want to build something bulletproof. Tell me, have you noticed any other businesses or homeowners having similar issues with Oak Ridge Heights?" That question led us down a rabbit hole I hadn't expected. Over the next week, Mike and I discreetly reached out to neighboring properties. The stories came pouring in like sawdust through a planer. The family-owned nursery that mysteriously lost its water access. The historic barn forced to repaint 4 times in 6 months. The horse stable pressured into relocating after bogus animal welfare complaints. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Robert Walsh, Patricia's nervous secretary, showed up at my yard one rainy morning, looking over his shoulder like a man expecting snipers. "I can't take it anymore," he said, hands shaking as he pulled out a USB drive. "It's all here, emails, meeting minutes, the whole operation. Patricia's been working with developers to force out local businesses. They're planning to expand Oak Ridge Heights, turn it into some kind of luxury estate community. Your lumber yard is sitting on their prime real estate." Sarah was ecstatic when I brought her the drive. "This isn't just harassment anymore," she said, scanning through the documents. "This is organized conspiracy. We need to call a town hall meeting." The meeting was set for Thursday evening at the local community center. I expected maybe 20 people to show up. Instead, the parking lot was full. Farmers, small business owners, longtime residents, all with their own stories about Patricia's reign of terror. Patricia herself arrived fashionably late, floating in like she owned the place. Her confident smile faltered when she saw the crowd, but she quickly recovered, taking a seat in the front row with her typical air of superiority. Sarah took the podium first. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight because our community is under attack, not from outside forces, but from within, from those who believe their vision of progress justifies destroying people's livelihoods. The evidence was damning. Security footage, emails, financial records showing suspicious payments from development companies to HOA board members. With each revelation, Patricia's perfectly maintained facade cracked a little more. Then came the testimonies. Mrs. Chun from the nursery, fighting back tears as she described watching her rare orchids die after her water was cut off. Old Joe Matthews, third-generation owner of the historic barn, his voice shaking with anger as he detailed the harassment his family endured. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. This isn't about property values or aesthetic harmony. This is about greed, about people who think their bank accounts give them the right to bulldoze over anyone in their way. Well, I've got news for you. Some things aren't for sale. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. This is ridiculous. We're trying to improve the community, to bring in development that will benefit everyone. Mr. Sullivan's archaic operation is holding back progress. Progress? A new voice cut through the chaos. Thomas Richardson, one of Patricia's own HOA board members, stood up. Is that what you call secretly negotiating with developers behind the board's back? Making backdoor deals to line your own pockets? The room erupted. Patricia tried to respond, but for once, her silver tongue failed her. As she stormed out, Sarah leaned over to me with a satisfied smile. Still think we don't have a case? Later that night, as Mike and I sat in my office reviewing the meeting footage, he shook his head in amazement. Did you see her face when Richardson stood up? Priceless. It's not over yet, I warned, but I couldn't help smiling. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like we had the upper hand. No, Mike agreed, raising his coffee mug in a toast. But the end is coming. And something tells me Patricia Anderson isn't going to like how this story ends. Looking at the stack of evidence on my desk, I had to agree. The final battle was approaching, and this time, we were ready. Patricia wanted a war. Well, she was about to get one. The courtroom sat silent as Judge Harrison reviewed the evidence, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Patricia Anderson sat at the defendant's table, her perfect posture betraying only the slightest tremor when Sarah Martinez approached the bench with yet another exhibit. Your Honor, I draw your attention to Exhibit 27, Sarah said, her voice steady and confident. Emails between Mrs. Anderson and Platinum Development Group, dated 3 months before the harassment of my client began. Note specifically the line about removing undesirable elements from the proposed expansion zone. I watched Patricia's lawyer squirm. They tried to get the emails thrown out, claiming they were obtained illegally, but Robert Walsh's testimony had shut down that argument. The nervous secretary had turned into a surprisingly strong witness, detailing years of Patricia's schemes with devastating precision. Furthermore, Sarah continued, the security footage clearly shows Mrs. Anderson and her associates engaging in criminal vandalism. The damage to my client's inventory alone amounts to over $50,000. The evidence kept mounting. Financial records showing suspicious payments. Testimony from other victims. The doctored environmental reports Patricia had used to harass local businesses. Each revelation was another nail in her coffin. When Patricia finally took the stand, her usual confidence had evaporated. She tried to spin it as community improvement, claiming she was just trying to maintain standards. But Sarah was ready. Mrs. Anderson, could you explain this text message to Robert Walsh? Sarah held up an enlarged screenshot. Tell Sullivan to name his price before things get really unpleasant. Was that your idea of maintaining standards? Patricia's composure cracked. You don't understand. These people, their businesses, they're dragging down the whole area. We're trying to build something exceptional here. Sometimes progress requires sacrifice. Sacrifice? Sarah's voice could have frozen hell. You mean like sacrificing other people's livelihoods for your own profit? The court notes that you personally stood to gain over $2 million in consulting fees from Platinum Development if these properties were acquired. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison banged her gavel, but the damage was done. Patricia's face had gone from porcelain white to burning red. When the verdict came down, it was everything we'd hoped for and more. A permanent injunction against the HOA, preventing them from interfering with any businesses outside their boundaries. Personal damages assessed against Patricia and her conspirators. And the kicker, a criminal referral for conspiracy and fraud charges. But the real victory came afterward in the community center where it had all started. The new HOA board, led by Thomas Richardson, was signing a legally binding agreement with local business owners. No more harassment, no more bogus complaints, a commitment to coexistence and real community growth. I still can't believe we did it, Mike said, watching Richardson shake hands with Mrs. Chun from the nursery. Did you see Patricia's face when they read out the damages amount? I nodded, remembering her expression of utter disbelief. $2 million in compensatory damages plus punitive. She won't be funding any development projects for a while. Sarah joined us, looking satisfied. The DA's office is very interested in those backdoor dealings with Platinum. Apparently, there's a pattern of similar cases across 3 counties. Patricia might be trading her designer suits for Prison Orange. The aftermath brought changes I hadn't expected. Business actually improved. Turned out all the publicity had put Silver Creek Lumber and Mill on the map. People started driving in from other counties, wanting to support the business that stood up to HOA tyranny. A month later, I was working late in the shop when Richardson stopped by. He looked different now, more relaxed, the weight of Patricia's influence lifted from his shoulders. "We're reorganizing everything," he said, running his hand along a piece of walnut I was preparing. "Making the HOA what it should have been all along. A community organization, not a weapon for the privileged few." I appreciated the gesture, but kept working. "Just keep your side of the fence clean. I'll keep mine running smoothly." He smiled. "Fair enough, though I did have one small request." He pulled out some blueprints. "The community center needs new benches for the park. Thought you might be interested in the contract." Looking at the plans, I couldn't help but laugh. Sometimes victory comes in unexpected ways. These days, life has settled back into its rhythm. The saws still buzz, the wood still splits, and yes, sometimes it gets noisy. But now when I look across the fence line, I don't see enemies plotting my downfall. I see neighbors who learn the hard way that community isn't built by pushing people out. It's built by bringing them together. As for Patricia, last I heard, she'd moved to Florida, probably looking for another community to improve, but she left behind a valuable lesson. Never underestimate a man protecting his dream, especially when that dream comes with security cameras and a really good lawyer.